Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. I'm your host, Gorgeous George, and with me, as always, some of the sharpest MMA minds in the biz. Joining me this week, it's the return of Mike Bond, the MMA media titan, says he's pumped and ready to go. Goes from MMA Junkie Radio. Catch our podcast Mondays and Thursdays over at MMA Junkie or your favorite podcast platform. And Farah Hanoun is back from London. She covered UFC 286 for us and did an excellent job. Cold coffee on the ones and twos. Let's get to it. This past Saturday night at UFC 286, Leon Edwards defeated Kamaru Usman via unanimous decision. Majority decision. The scores were 48-46, 48-46, and 47-47. Was that the correct decision? What was the key difference in this fight for Edwards, who this time did not need a late rally to win the fight? Mike Bond, we come to you for the first take.
Yeah, I thought the scoring was appropriate. I mean, I could have seen it being a draw with that point deduction there. I think that was maybe something you could make a case for, but I did think Leon won 3 rounds, the first, second, and one of the other ones. I think it was for him, like the almost perfect performance of what you need to do coming off that first fight. And you asked what the biggest difference was, and I think it was, of course, the takedown defense, right? Like he seemed to have Usman's entries and the adjustments he wanted to make within the takedowns pretty well scouted. He didn't let him connect the hands. If you were listening to Daniel Cormier talk about this, he was able to fend off a lot of them. Of course, as you see there, he did get down a few times, but never to the point where Usman was able to control him for a prolonged period, inflict some heavy ground and pound or damage, or get close on a submission attempt. So if you're Leon, like this is exactly what you needed to do out there. Of course, like the stand up, he attacked those legs a lot, man. And you can kind of see from the beginning, he was trying to go low so he could move up high. And he almost got him in that 4th round. I mean, that one head kick that he threw was like almost a flashback. It was really close there, but obviously, Usman, he gave him credit post fight for being able to, upgrade his defense a little bit and have that one scouted. So yeah, like a good performance by both guys, but Leon, I think he showed that he was more prepared for this fight and he knew what he needed to do to go in there and win. And I think put any questions about the ending of the second fight to rest. Was it a fluke? Was it this? Was it that? I think the more that you kind of look at this fight, you see that maybe in fight number 2, things like the altitude and all that kind of stuff did really affect Leon. I think this was a bigger reflection of what he is as a fighter. So definitely congrats to him. I think this was a good performance. At worst, a draw with the point deduction, but I don't think Kamaru Usman won.
Okay, fair enough. And yeah, there was a point deduction there. That's why those wonky scores of 48-46 2-time. The 47-47 was really a 48-47 for Leon Edwards. But the point deduction came from a fence grab, one other way to avoid the ground, and a controversial way of this happening in fights where the point is getting taken away, but the position that the grappler wanted is no longer available. But yeah, I haven't heard any excuses from either side, and I don't believe there's too many people that think that was the possible difference here. All credit to Leon Edwards. Great fight for him. Goes, how about you, man? Reaction? Did you like that score, and what was the key difference?
So I actually, the night of, scored it a draw. I have no problem, though, with going the other way towards Leon Edwards. It was a really, really good fight, and it was an absolute blur because it was so much fun and there was so much going on from the beginning. Like, even if you go before the fight even started, and I think this is part of one of the keys to Leon Edwards' win, was his confidence and his swag. I think he really did get in Kamaru Usman's head early on in the week. I think he pissed him off, and I think that's what got Kamaru a little bit away from his wrestling, right? If you look at the first minute of the last fight, okay, the fight before, look at Leon Edwards, all right? Now look at him in the first 30 seconds of this fight. It's a complete different demeanor. His stance, the way he's looking at him, he just had this swag and this confidence about him that he could pull off whatever he needed to do to win this fight. It's almost like they switched roles for this fight because Kamaru Usman kind of looked a little different. He looked a little shook. He's in enemy territory. There's people screaming at him, yelling at him, reminding him of what happened the last time they fought, which was one of his worst moments in front of millions and millions of people. So I think the pressure did maybe get to Kamaru Usman a little bit, but it's so hard to evaluate his performance because of how good Leon Edwards looked. I felt like Leon Edwards would have beat just about anybody that night. That's how good he looked, man. He embraced that home crowd. he embraced his role, and he had confidence in himself. And I think that, along with his level changes, his defensive wrestling, that he just blended everything in for the perfect performance.
And Fada, you were at the O2, so now you're my go-to. Tell me, man, what were you feeling that night at UFC 286, and what did you see transpire here? The big key difference for Rocky.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference, or the biggest deciding factor, was impact. I think everything Leon did just seemed to have a little more impact than Kamaru, because a lot of these rounds were really close. All of them pretty much were. There was no round that was necessarily clear cut for anybody. So when you look at the way the first round started, Kamaru was a little tentative, and you could tell that, Leon was convinced all fight week that head kick knockout would affect him mentally, and you could tell he was a lot more tentative to throw. I think when you look at Leon's work, I think he just did a perfect job of not expending too much energy, countering at the perfect opportunity. He just, from the body kicks, it's funny, they were chanting like headshot dead. I think the body shots are kind of what the major difference was here in this fight. He was hitting him with some really big body shots. He landed a good knee. His strikes just seemed to have more impact. Kamaru was pressuring a lot, and he was able to briefly get Leon down, but Leon did a great job of getting back up. So I don't think it was necessarily a bad performance from Kamaru Usman. I just think it would have helped him out to kind of throw more, just higher output. Round 3, I kind of feel for him, because that fence grab, there's the point deduction, but then they stand them back up. That was a position where if Usman maintained it, who knows, you can't say that for sure, but that could have been, if they gave him that position back, he maybe could have just stayed on there and won that round definitively. I believe 2 of the judges gave that round to Leon, which ended up in a 9-9. So yeah, I mean, it was a close fight, but I just think overall, Leon Edwards, everything he did just had a little more sting, a little more impact, and that's always not only makes a difference in terms of the damage, but in terms of the judges' eyes.
Now, you three did a great job of unpacking this and answering the question. And here's another thing. I mean, we talked about X's and O's strategy, what we saw with our own eyes. Here's something that Teddy Atlas tweeted on Fight Night. Regarding Usman and Edwards, the old-time trainers used to tell me that winning a title immediately improves you 30%. He said that prior to the fight. And I want to ask you all, could it be just that as well? Like confidence and also fighting in your home country, that can possibly be the difference? Mike, we'll go back to you. Let's go to Goes. Mike, I can't hear you right now. Let's go to Goes real fast.
I think there are cases where that has happened, but I don't know that you could put it across the board. And the case would be this. I mean, like, how many people have won championships and have been unable to defend them, right? And that's where that old saying is, you're not really the champ until you at least defend it one time. So I'm sure there are fighters that you can point to where you can say that, but there are a lot of them that have failed in their first title defense. So I guess I kind of disagree a little bit.
All right, Mike, back to you. Did you see anything just from him being champ that maybe makes someone better?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all quote, but I do think there's something to it for sure. I mean, in Leon's case, it seems like there was that on the night, but I think he thought he was capable of performing like this in the last fight as well. He just couldn't get the ball rolling in that one. And this, I think, was, as I said earlier, a much stronger reflection of who he is. And there is one thing I guess I want to address that I didn't really talk earlier about. You mentioned the fouls and stuff when it came to Leon. There was a lot of weirdness to this fight, right? Like, it felt like the momentum couldn't ever truly get going because it was like one interruption after the next. And I did think that took away from it a little bit. And you have, Colby Covington out here saying, I think in interview with Submission Radio, saying that Leon's a dirty fighter and all this stuff. I don't know if I want to go quite there yet, but if you combine, the Bilal Muhammad fight, which ended in an eye poke, with this, which had, a glove grab, short grab, eye pokes, groin kicks, all that stuff. It's starting to build a case that doesn't reflect too well on Leon. So hopefully this is just something we don't ever have to talk about going into future fights, but there is a bit of a pattern forming. But ultimately, as far as you say, I think Leon's performance, putting all that aside, definitely was an upgraded version. I think it was all those things you said, man. He was so confident in there, and how could he not be? Look at how he put away Kamaru in the last fight.
Yeah. And Fada, you heard Kamaru said now he has to deal with additional media and a lot of pressure, and that could maybe make a difference. The verbal warfare and the mental warfare, was pretty top notch there. like keeping it subtle without having to shove each other and, incidents in the hotel.
Yeah, I mean, Leon was oozing confidence all week. That kind of made me like be on the fence a little bit. I did originally pick Usman, and I was wrong. Granted, I don't have the best track record this year, but just watching Leon's demeanor all week, I mean, he was extremely confident, because it's easy for people to call things excuses. It kind of reminds me of Amanda Nunes, Juliana Pena, when they fought, and Amanda came out and said, talked about sickness or injuries and stuff. And I was like, excuses. And then she went on and she dominated the rematch. So when people come out and talk, sometimes it works against them, because sometimes they're valid excuses, but people dub them as excuses. And he was talking about the altitude a lot leading up to this fight. And he kind of showed that, yeah, it was a factor in their second fight, excuse me. And he came out here and was able to kind of fend off what Usman had most success with, which was the grappling. And we've seen Usman drop Burns and put him out. We've seen him knock Jorge Masvidal out. We've seen him, finish Colby Covington. But on the feet, Leon showed that he had a significant advantage, and we weren't seeing that from Kamaru Usman. And he came into this fight even more tentative than the last one when it came to his strikes, which helped him close the distance and get those takedowns. So I think that was big.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to the second topic, which kind of relates to the welterweight scheme, the title picture, and all that. How do you guys feel about Dana White saying Edwards versus Covington is the fight to make? Remember, Covington's name was brought up when Fada mentioned him earlier. He was there. He weighed in. I don't think any of us knew that he was going to be the backup fighter. He, of course, was telling everybody he hopped on the plane, 1 day notice. I don't know how far out this was planned out. So it's not going to be the Burns Masvidal winner. Remember, 3-piece in a soda. It's not going to be Bilal Muhammad, who's won 8 straight. You heard me right. I heard him right. That's Dana saying it. The guy who doesn't make fights on fight night said Edwards versus Covington is next. Goes, react.
Yeah, I mean, dude, that one really hurts, I think, for a guy like Bilal Muhammad. I'm with you, George. I was completely shocked that news came out. But, I mean, Bilal Muhammad keeps getting the shaft, right? Like, 8 fights in a row is so difficult to do, man, in any division. Him and Beneil Dariush, 2 guys who have streaks like that, and they just keep getting pushed aside, right? Like the UFC's forgetting his name. They're supposed to remember his name. That dude is a tough fighter, man, and I think he's done everything to deserve that title shot. Now, Colby Covington, I'm not a fool. I know he probably sells really well, and I would imagine if I'm Colby Covington and they tell me, we need you to make weight on foreign soil, I would probably say something like, I'll do it. But guess what? I get the next shot. I would imagine something like that went down. I wish we had a little bit more news on that decision and how it would play out, because a guy like Bilal Muhammad absolutely deserves something like that. And I gave the comparison of Beneil Dariush, who maybe you can look at and say, well, all right, he's a little bit more quiet. He doesn't really ask for things. Bilal Muhammad's been asking this for a long time, right? Now you have a really messed up situation, because if Colby Covington gets in there, they're gonna if you look at like Leon Edwards getting a victory there, who are they gonna match him up with, right? Like, what if Masvidal gets a win there? Then that matchup comes out. Like, it's just really, really bad for a fighter who does everything they ask from him. He gets wins. He's vocal on the mic. He's fun to watch. I don't understand why his name wasn't called.
Yeah, and he's coming off a finish. Remember, people kept saying, well, he kind of goes to a decision. He had an emphatic finish. I believe it was Sean Brady in Abu Dhabi last year. So he has ticked all the boxes, but he's the one that's currently ticked off. Fada, up until 6 months ago, we used to say, all of us, well, Kobe's the second best welterweight on the planet. He's only lost to Usman, and he was very competitive versus Usman. And then 6 months ago, here comes Rocky Edwards with the head kick. He follows it up with the title defense. So he's kind of like just not really that guy anymore. It's like, I thought we kind of reshuffled the deck, and it should have been Bilal Muhammad. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, tough break for Bilal, because I spoke to him during when this happened, and he wanted to fight Colby on this card, and it would have made sense to dub that as a number 1 contender fight. So Bilal's always been willing to fight. He's one of those guys in the division that has said yes to everybody they've put in front of him. And to hear Dana later on say that they want to match him with Shavkat Rakhmonov is, I mean, I already thought the Sean Brady fight was risky for Bilal. It looked like it was a way to potentially build Sean Brady off of him, and he put a halt to that. He took the O from his unbeaten record, and he finished him after people criticized that he doesn't put guys away. And now they want to put him against Shavkat Rakhmonov, where obviously in Rakhmonov's case, he has a lot to gain. He's fighting a top contender with a winning streak. For Bilal, it's just another opportunity to halt a hype train. But then what? You've got Leon Edwards saying that he wants to fight, if Jorge Masvidal beats Gilbert Burns. He's looking at that. Leon Edwards saying, I don't want to fight Colby. Colby doesn't deserve it. He went on to admit that, it's not necessarily that he thinks Jorge deserves it, but they've got that beef to settle. So it's just a bit of a logjam that we're in right now. And I think a lot will depend on who wins between Masvidal and Burns, because if Leon will get his say and he will get Masvidal, if Masvidal beats Burns, then you got to make Colby and Bilal. I think that's the fight to make as opposed to Rakhmonov. I love Shavkat Rakhmonov, and I see title contention in his future too. But I just think if we're going through a pecking order, I don't know what's going to happen, because Leon right now is saying that he does not want to fight Colby Covington and he doesn't think he deserves it. So is Leon going to get what he wants? And what if Burns beats Masvidal? Then what? So I don't know. It depends on, UFC dubbed Colby as the number one contender. Let's see if Leon will actually take it or go a different direction.
Mm-hmm. And Mike, I want you to chime in on the topic, obviously, but I want to throw one more on your plate, and that's champions do usually get a say as to who they want to fight, but I feel like that comes a little bit later, maybe like when you get to that fourth title defense and maybe some are on repeat and you got to do the rematches or whatever. It's still early on in Leon's career. What do you remember from covering the sport? Like, does the UFC just kind of make the match and say, here it is? Or when do they start kind of consult and say, hey, we're partners in this?
I mean, it's, again, all circumstantial, right? It depends on the person, what position they're in, how far into the reign, and how much, star power and things like that they have on their side. For Leon, I don't necessarily think he has that quite yet. I mean, it's going to come down to how him and his management team can discuss with the UFC if they really don't want this Colby Covington fight and are wanting to draw a line in the sand. Maybe Leon suddenly has an injury that needs to be taken care of and he's out 6-8 months, and Colby doesn't have a choice but to fight someone else in the meantime. Like, there's so many different ways that this could go potentially. But again, it's just, you see, Tim Simpson, his manager, in that video, like, how hard do they want to push back here? It's kind of hard to, I get like the personal side of the Jorge Masvidal thing. And if he wins against Gilbert Burns, especially spectacularly, there is that storyline there, much more of one than there is with Colby. But we know Colby, has, for better or worse, his following. And right now he's someone who's kind of in a good position. You just listen to what Farah said there. Like, yeah, you could make a case here and there for everyone. And you can make a case here and there almost against everyone. Like, we did see Bilal and Leon fight a full round, and that fight didn't look like it was going to go too kindly to Bilal if it kept going. I know the eye poke was early in the second, and there was a lot of fight to still be had, but we have seen a flash of that, and a fight between Colby and Leon is something fresh, something new that we haven't seen at this point. So I get why they're trying to do this, but yeah, I mean, if you're Leon, I think this is a pretty high selling fight for you. If you're the champion getting the pay-per-view points, I don't know if it's radically different from Masvidal, and it's kind of hard to sit there and say Colby doesn't deserve the shot, but Masvidal does, even if he beats Gilbert Burns, when Colby just beat Masvidal pretty lopsidedly not that long ago. It's basically the only personal element in the three-piece Minnesota thing that you're trying to use to sell that fight. So to me, there's a lot of complicated factors in this. I don't think there's anyone who's necessarily getting screwed over here. I know, like, Bilal in theory has the best case, but Dana White has said how many times before and after the Covington versus Usman fights, if Kamaru Usman didn't exist, Colby Covington is the best welterweight in the world and the champion. Yeah. Well, Kamaru Usman is no longer the champion, so I guess Dana White wants to find out if his theory is accurate or not. So I guess that's what we're going to find out now.
Yeah, and Dana really leaned into, hey, this guy hopped on a plane, he came in, he dropped the weight, he was ready to go, and
they knew that was happening for a few weeks. I mean, it was kind of kept well under wraps, but kind of talking about it after the fact, now that it came out, it sounds like at least Leon's side knew that was a possibility. I don't know what Kamaru and his team knew. But yeah, if Colby Covington, you hear him say that he found out on Tuesday and flew over Wednesday, cut weight Thursday, and weighed in Friday. taken with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I've taken that one with a grain of salt for sure. And also, I think he was willing to fight both of them at the same time.
For sure.
He mentioned that one as well.
And if I could chime in, like,
Sure.
because Dana, when they'd asked Dana about Colby, he said, Colby hasn't been turning down fights. So it seems like the UFC really want Colby Covington in this position, which is why they gave him the call. Because Bilal, when I spoke to him as well, he was talking about wanting to be the backup, but the UFC never contacted him to be the backup. So it seems like that's what the UFC wants. And if you're Colby Covington, it's not like you're going to say no. So at the end of the day, he is coming off of a win over Jorge Masvidal, and UFC called him to be the backup. And it seems like, what Mike referred to earlier with Dana saying that if Kamaru wasn't champion, that he would. It seems like the UFC want Colby Covington in this position. So, if you're Colby, what are you going to say? No, I want to fight somebody else than the title shot. So.
And then the ultimate way, I mean, if UFC, I think, had its perfect world druthers, Colby Covington beats Leon Edwards, Conor McGregor beats Michael Chandler, and you have Colby Covington versus Conor McGregor for a UFC title. Love it or hate it, that would do something.
I keep forgetting those guys keep insisting at 170. And yes, Conor they were asking him about that, him versus Edwards. But because he's such a unicorn, anything is possible with the Irishman. Ireland versus England, or like Mike said, versus Colby. Oh my God. Yeah, it is. That's a lot to take in. Here, I'm going to the chat. Vanguard says, I'm rooting for Leon against Colby Covington, he says. Oh, he's getting creative with the nicknames too. Mantis Cyber says, I'd rather see Bilal versus Colby. The fuck, he even says. I want to see Bilal just next for the title. I do want to see Bilal versus Colby at some point. I would have wanted to see Bilal versus Colby this particular night, but either way, I felt like Bilal had already became the number one contender already. And Poppy Giorgio is going really, really conspiracy here. He says Colby dropped the charges on Masvidal for the title shot. LOL. He does laugh it off. If you want to
think about Colby is
go
just
ahead
if I
and
can
get a question or
say,
comment, I will read it off. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I know I kind of said earlier that no one, deserves it, doesn't deserve it. I mean, I get the thing with Colby. Like, there is a lot of holes to be poked in his resume. I mean, he hasn't fought more than once a year, besides 2019, since like 2017, it looks like. And you look at his last 3 wins against Masvidal, Woodley, Robbie Lawler. All 3 of those guys came in on at least a 2-fight losing streak. He hasn't beat a guy coming off a win in the welterweight division since he beat RDA for the interim title back in 2018. And of course, you can make a case, RDA, an undersized welterweight, all that stuff. So like, there is a lot of flaw in Covington's resume. But again, as far as said, if they're going to offer you a title shot, you're not going to say no. So like, can't really blame him. This is more on the UFC, how they match make him. And we're like almost seeing kind of a weird trend here, right? Like, John Jones out for 3 years, gets a title shot. Henry Cejudo out 2.5 years, gets a title shot. Covington going to be out like 1.5 years, gets a title shot. So, Dana White wants to say he loves to see the guys who are active and fight and do all this stuff, and they get rewarded. But sometimes it feels like the opposite, especially when you're talking about the title shot and highest level.
Yeah, and I'm wondering why he didn't announce Pavlovich versus Jones, because if you fly in and you are weigh in and you're ready to go, you get that title shot. But whatever, man, that dude. All right, topic number 3 in the co-main event. I know a lot of you are chomping at the bit because this was a great fight as well. Justin Gaethje went out and scored a great win over Rafael Fiziev when a lot of people seem to have counted him out. He was more than a 2-1 underdog heading in. Did the performance make you believe that Gaethje can still be a champion in the lightweight division? Leading off is Fada.
Who's to say he can? I think the thing with Justin Gaethje, he's had some key losses that have affected him, and they've been, when you look at his loss to Khabib, loss to Charles Oliveira, it's been in the grappling department. And when you look at who's champion right now, it's Islam Makhachev, and he's a very talented grappler himself. But the thing about Justin Gaethje, you're going to be in a tough fight when you're fighting Justin Gaethje. Win or lose, the guy does damage. Even back then, when you look at his loss to Dustin Poirier, he was able to do some damage to Dustin Poirier. And then you look at his fight against Charles Oliveira, he was able to drop Oliveira. Now, I know, granted, people are going to say that so did Michael Chandler. He was able to drop Charles Oliveira as well. But Gaethje does damage. He's a tough fight no matter what. And he looked like he was getting stronger against Fiziev. I think that was also a very close fight. That's a different discussion, because I think there can also be a case for Fiziev rounds 1 and 2. But I can also see how Justin Gaethje wins. He finished out the fight really strong, and I think 5 rounds, he was on his way to kind of winning that fight if it was a 5-round fight. But regardless, he had a very good performance. I thought Justin Gaethje looked very good against Fiziev, showed that he's still part of the top of the division. I think you run it back with Dustin Poirier. I think he needs to get over that hump, because him and Dustin Poirier have had that issue again, losing to the grapplers, losing to Oliveira, losing to Khabib. Those 2 guys need to fight. I think it's the perfect fight to make right now. And if you can get past Dustin Poirier, I think you can start putting his name in the title conversations again. Before everyone goes crazy, yes, if Beneil Dariush beats Charles Oliveira, he's next. I thought Beneil should have gotten the title shot anyway. But I'm saying, if they match them up after Beneil fights.
Fada, if Oliveira beats Beneil, do they run that back with Makhachev so soon? Or do you think he would still need one more?
Yeah, no, I think he could still need one more. I mean, Gaethje said he's open to rematching Oliveira. No, I don't know how much that would make sense and what you do with Dustin Poirier. So it's a lot of factors that play into it. But he's willing to rematch Oliveira as well. I know he wants that one back. But to answer your initial question of whether Justin Gaethje could be champion again, the champion again seems to be someone who's got really good grappling, and that's kind of been what has happened to Gaethje and what has happened to Dustin Poirier, both former interim champions, but why they haven't been able to get over that hump and be undisputed champ is because the guys that hold the belts just happen to be really, really good grapplers.
Mike, what did you think of Gaethje's performance? Can he be a champ again? And here's another one I'm going to add to you. You know, a lot of times when someone like a Makhachev or someone comes in, like someone's a steamroller, right? And then all of a sudden, a fighter breaks them down, shows that they're just human like the rest of us. It's like the rest of the division gets excited. I'll give you an example. Hamza Chimaev destroying, then Gilbert Burns really, really tests them. And now a lot of people are like, give me Chimaev. I'll take on Chimaev. You know, so Makhachev comes in. He's been steamrolling, but that fight versus Volkanovski, I think a lot of lightweights got excited at the prospects of their chances versus Makhachev.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess your first question, I thought Gaethje looked solid in there. I think this fight was a testament to his evolution for what we've seen earlier in his career and to Trevor Whitman's coaching. I mean, he was really struggling with that speed advantage in the first couple of rounds there. Like, it was causing him a lot of problems, but he was able to adjust. You could see he had a lot of the combos Fiziev was throwing his way well scouted. He just wasn't able to get out of the way earlier on, but he was able to do that better and better as the fight wore on, and then he was able to time his offense a little bit better. It was still the chaotic, bloody type of Justin Gaethje fight we have come to love and expect, but a little bit more refined from him, which I think is what he needs if he wants to be winning fights like this, especially against like the next crop of up-and-coming contenders at lightweight. So, yeah, a solid win for him. I agree with Farah there. I think there's a case that he maybe did lose this fight round 1 and 2. I think the judge who scored round 3, 10-8 for Gaethje, I didn't necessarily see it that way. That's what led to a draw on one card. Otherwise, it would have been a split decision win for him rather than a majority decision. But nevertheless, I don't have a huge problem with him losing here. Question 2, can he become champion? I mean, I think with that style, he can beat anyone on any given night, right? Like, it depends on what the opponent is trying to do in there. He can suck them into his game, and he's able to fend off takedowns and things like that. He is able to, dig down deeper than a lot of people in this weight class, and he could win any of these fights. I think anyone in the top 5. So I wouldn't rule it out. I wouldn't necessarily, for the reasons Farah explained there with, the grapplers at the top of this weight class, I wouldn't necessarily put my money on it, but I think he has a chance. And your third question there, I think that's a great point as well. I do think that when you look at the other fighters in this division, now looking at Islam Makhachev, you look at him as a little more human. I mean, I think if you're Dustin Poirier, Gaethje, Dariush, you see that fight and maybe you saw a little bit more flaws in his game. Gaethje said at the post-fight just the other night, like, he's, as talking about Makhachev, he's like Khabib, but he's not Khabib. We've seen him lose before. We've seen him get finished before. Even though it was a lifetime ago and that was a young Islam Makhachev, like, just knowing that there's that footage out there and knowing it's possible does a lot for a fighter's confidence, right? And you don't see, like, against Khabib, we saw so little flaws. People for years would hang on to him eating like one hard punch from Michael Johnson and be like, hey, maybe he can be rocked or something, but it never really panned out that way. So I think that's an interesting fight for Gaethje, especially his defensive grappling against Islam. It would be compelling for sure, but he's got a little more work to do. I mean, I think absolutely agree with Farah. him versus Dustin Poirier, the rematch, is the fight to make. I'd love to see that 5 rounds. The last one they did in Gaethje's backyard in Arizona. Let's do this one in New Orleans at the Smoothie King Center in Dustin Poirier's backyard. Run it back. I think that would be a perfect fight. And then we see how this plays out with Oliveira and Dariush. Seems like Makhachev's not going to fight till October in Abu Dhabi. You know, if Volkanovski beats Yair Rodriguez in the meantime and Dariush loses, like, you never know. Maybe we just get that rematch right away on Islam's end. There's a lot of different ways that this can go. But if you're looking at the lay of the land at lightweight, it's got to be Poirier versus Gaethje too. And that's a hugely important fight. And then you kind of see how everything shakes out from there.
Yeah, look at Mike Bond, man, handling all the questions. That's why he's an MMA media titan. He even throws in the name of the arena. These arenas change names every other week. So
how could you forget the Smoothie King Center? I mean, that's like an easy one.
All right, how about you, Goes? Yeah, we're coming to you now. The performance. I know I did the watch along with you, but still, man, that was one hell of a fight. We've still been buzzing about it.
Yeah, speaking of Smoothie Kings, I think I got that title too, man. But that Justin Gaethje, like, yes, I do think he has what it takes to get a title. But I think what he's battling is just the situation, like the other two laid out. That it could be a really long wait depending on who beats who. He could be waiting for a while, and he's getting older, right? But what I did like about this Justin Gaethje was he just seemed pissed off, man. I think he was pissed off that they tried to put him in that situation where somebody was going to try and get over on him. And what he really did was he really just went back and somewhat reinvented himself, but still staying true to himself, right? We saw him finally use his wrestling. We saw him kind of use patience, right? We talk about Mike Tyson back in the day. He was an aggressive fighter, but the reason he was successful was he knew when to be aggressive and when not to be. He didn't just come out when the bell rang and start throwing punches like a maniac, right? Justin Gaethje was very patient in round 1. And there were times where I think he could have been dragged into an old Justin Gaethje type fight. And I think he kind of pulled back a little bit. And I think that really benefited him when he mixed in those leg kicks. He mixed in the defense, right? Finally, a little bit of wrestling. He just needs to keep evolving this version of Justin Gaethje. And I agree with Mike. I think he listened to his corner a lot in this one too. The patience, the leg kicks, the uppercuts that were so massive and they were landing right on the button. The confidence, he is a hard dude to deal with. If the evolution of this Justin Gaethje continues, I believe that he could do that.
Yeah, and another thing too, there's one thing to have leg kicks in your arsenal and utilize them. There's another thing to use them, and then a lot of fighters will get away from them, and Gaethje brought them back, you know? So I think maybe that goes to what you were saying, Goes. He was calm, he was patient, and it all came together. That uppercut, that collar tie was amazing. He kept sneaking it in there, and he just bludgeoned Fiziv's face. And Fiziv's going to become a lot better as well because of this fight. The comment section here, JD Realty YT says, Gaethje is a beast, but he's 0-2 in title fights. He needs a W over Poirier or 2 solid W's to get him back in there. I think that's kind of what we laid out. A lot of us are really wanting to see the rematch versus Poirier. Low Blow Nickel kind of repeated what you said, Goes, or maybe you repeated what he said. If Gaethje fights with patience and smartness, he could win any fight. Me Diamond 44, though, he says Gaethje's more concerned with being an exciting fighter, not a winner. That's his road back to becoming champion. I would slightly disagree with that. I think he kind of, him putting the interim belt on the floor, and sometimes he sounds like he's a little bit bitter and dismissive of the media, or maybe even sometimes stuff that he hears from the fans. But make no mistake, man, that guy wants to win, and he definitely wants to be a champion. He's a former WSOF champ with title defenses. He's an interim champ in the UFC. The only thing missing, I guess, is undisputed champion in the UFC. And I think this fight proved that he still has gas in the tank, and he still wants to get in there and make something of this career, the greatness of his career. So I would disagree with that last comment. But man, props to both guys. They shared that $50,000 bonus, so I couldn't be any happier with that matchup. All right, panel. This is usually the standard question for me after a big event, but I love it. I think it's fair. It gives us a chance to give some love to everybody else that was on the card and may have got overlooked. I mean, look, we've spent a majority of this time just on the 2 fights. So here we go. who on the outside of the co-main and the main event fights was your star of the night from this UFC 286 card this past Saturday? We're coming back to Mike Braun.
For me, it was Gunnar Nelson. Just I'm a kind of stat geek here, and I love the facts and the numbers and stuff. And for him to set himself apart from the pack and becoming the all-time leader in welterweight history for most submissions, that's a pretty special thing for him to do. I mean, he was tied with Damian Maia, who, as we know, what that guy's capable of when it comes to submission. That's pretty impressive, right? And also Chris Lytle, who's one of the more historically successful submission artists at 170 pounds and, a bonus king as well in that weight class. So for him to kind of launch up there and be able to do that after all these years of work, that was impressive. Brian Barberina, I know he's been submitted a number of times in the UFC, so maybe it loses a little bit of its luster there, but still a good feat from Gunnar Nelson. And you kind of look around, like there's not going to be anyone who is going to be threatening this record for a little while. I think the next best person in terms of submission finishes at welterweight is Shavkat Rakhmonov, who in fairness has done it pretty quick, but he's still way down there at 4. And I'm sure Gunnar Nelson isn't done either in terms of finishing fights by submission in the UFC. So a nice little feather in his cap there. He's been extremely inactive over the years. So for him to get a win like that on a pay-per-view main card, featured bout, all that stuff, it's good for his career. And hopefully this is the start of some momentum on Gunnar Nelson's side that we can see him roll forward into the rest of this year and see him fight, maybe 2-3 times this year.
I came down hard on Nelson last year because all of London was spectacular, except for Nelson versus Sato, I believe.
Right.
It just kind of like slowed things down. It was like that knock at the door at the party. It's the cops. Shh, keep it down and all that stuff. And remember, it was right between Molly McCann's elbow and Patty Pimblett, making the place erupt. But he came in, and I'll tell you what, that last minute before the round, Nelson improving his position and then shooting for that armbar. It was beautiful. So I take back some of the stuff I said, Gunnar. Great finish. Congrats on the bonus as well. How about you, Goes? Who was your star of the night, aside from the main and the co-main?
For me, it was Muhammad Mokaev, man. This dude has the makings of somebody who could come out and be a force for years to come. He's undefeated. He's vocal about his career, and he backs up everything he says outside of the cage, in the cage. And now we know that he's got no quit in him, right? The situation that he was in with his knee bending back the way it was, that was painful, man. And most people, I think, would have just given up in that instance. And he not only did not tap, got out of it, and somehow pretended like it didn't even affect him the way he was moving afterwards. And then he came out and got a submission of his own. I don't understand why the UFC doesn't put more behind this guy. You're missing the boat. There's been a couple fighters like this throughout history where the UFC was just a little bit late to the party. George Masvidal was one of them. For a long time, people were saying this could be a star. I think Mokaev could be a star, and I think we could see him fighting for a title soon. But props to that guy, man. And I just hope, the knee's okay after what it endured in that fight. But I think for years to come, we're going to be talking about this kid.
Dude, I don't know what was more painful, that or that splits that he did before the fight even started. I remember looking at that going, my God. How about you, Fada? Who was your star of the night?
Yeah, Mokaev is a great shout. He's supposed to get an MRI today, so we'll find out what happened with his knee. But another guy is Yanala Shmuz. I mean, who really knew much about him when he came into this fight and was put into this card? I think a lot of people were high on Sam Patterson. The British fans were very excited. He got one of the louder pops from the English fighters. They're excited to see him, and he comes in and spoils the party with a really brutal and scary knockout. I mean, the way Sam fell down, I mean, I felt like there was a few unnecessary punches that he took at the end. He got up and he was trying to fight Mark Goddard, and it took him a while to understand what was happening. So I thought that was a very perfect welcome to the UFC type of moment. And if you, not to quote Dana White, if you don't know, now you know type of thing, he came in and kind of just silenced the 0-2 with an incredible knockout. He caught the kick and punched Sam while he was falling back. So that was, I guess Sam didn't see that coming at all, put him out cold, and he wants a quick turnaround. And I think people will definitely know who he is when he gets matched up for a future card. I think he's going to have quite a bit of people excited. He's still young in his career, unbeaten. So still obviously a lot of question marks in that regard. But you put on a performance like that, he looked very exciting. He did exactly what he needed to do in a card that was packed with British talent. very good main and co-main. He did a phenomenal job of standing out, especially with a card that was kind of all about the UK talent or main or co-main. So I thought he really rose to the occasion.
Plus 220, plus 240 underdog. Total parlay buster as well. So yeah, that's a good one. I really like that one. Congrats to win in the O2, you know, against somebody that's either home country or from that part of the world. That's a huge win. Great stuff there. All right, we move on to topic number 5. So we had another kind of a fight midweek. It was McGregor versus USADA. I wanted to see what you guys make of this mess and Dana White's comments in London when he was asked about this. But I'm going to give you guys some cliff notes. Not you three. You three are three of the sharpest MMA minds in the biz. That's why we bring you in here. But I think the audience should kind of have an idea. So McGregor basically said, look, I'm not going to give you the whole quotes, but he basically said he just needs 2 tests and he's good to go. He said that on the MMA Hour. And then USADA immediately said, well, it's going to be 2 tests and 6 months of being in the testing pool, and then he's good to go. When Dana White was asked about this, he said he didn't want any part of this, and he punted to Jeff Nowitzki and USADA. A couple times he was asked about it, and that's exactly what he did. Just, that's not my thing. I don't have to deal with it. Proudly said that. That's Jeff Nowitzki and USADA. So listen, guys, there's a built-in asterisk that says that the UFC can waive the 6-month testing period under exceptional circumstances. I did the air quotes there for those that are just listening. However, there's one part that I pulled out of the quote for of USADA's statement that I think is going to apply here. While the rules permit the UFC to make an exception to the 6-month rule in exceptional circumstances, when the strict application of the rule would be manifestly unfair to the athlete, our position, which we have made clear, is that Conor should be in the testing pool for this full 6-month period. So the reason I bring that up, guys, is because, again, Dana punted back to Jeff Nowitzki and USADA, who kind of made their statement already. And I think that's where maybe Dana may have shot himself in the foot in case he does want to maybe lean, you know, on this exemption on some point. Not that he ever cares when people bring back stuff up to him that he said before, but you guys know how this works. All right, so Goes, what say you, man? Help us unpack all this.
Well, I think when you're the head of the company, when your biggest star is on the line, you need to know what's going on minute by minute. You have to have some kind of opinion on it. I know that you have people that handle that stuff and follow it more closely, but you got to have some kind of an opinion. We need to know where you stand on this because a lot's on the line for the UFC here. An exemption for Conor McGregor at this point, I think would look pretty ridiculous. It would look terrible to people who watch MMA, people who cover MMA, and most importantly, the other people on that roster. I think if they saw something like that go down, it would just it would feel horrible to see something like that happen. And I get it, man. The dude's the golden goose, and the company makes a lot of money with him and all that. But the sport has to have some kind of structure and some kind of rules to it. And we can't just push those aside whenever we feel like it. And Michael Chandler's a guy who's wrapped up in all this, right? He's attached to the golden goose. How long is he going to want to sit around and wait for all this to play out? I think we all know what the right thing is here, what needs to happen. And I wish it would just be a little bit more clearer out there.
Mm-hmm. All right. How about you, Fada? What do you think of this whole mess, I guess? I don't know if it's a mess or what it is, but it was pretty big news last week. Biggest star in the sport. You know, he's already somewhat committed to coming back. He just filmed tough for 6 weeks here in Las Vegas. It's a great fight that awaits him. He has entry points into title shots with 1 win. I mean, we even say that it's probably acceptable, but yet this thing is looming here over his head.
Oh, Dana White just popped in the chat. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I mean, listen, at the end of the day, we saw what happened with Brock Lesnar. So I think that's kind of what everybody is pointing out, especially when they look at McGregor's physique. Look, at the end of the day, McGregor has never failed a drug test. So there's no point of putting that on him and claiming that he would fail. People are looking at his physique and speculating that would be the case. He hasn't been tested in a while. He did break his leg. So I think, how do you silence all those question marks? You get back in the testing pool. And I think that's kind of what needs to happen for all the doubt that is casted on the change of his physique, on his recovery with his broken leg. I know you said, Go said, you know, Michael Chandler is not going to want to wait forever. I know how much he's dying for the McGregor fight, though, so he'll probably wait. He's willing to take it at 85 at this point. But at the end of the day, I think, you know, the right thing to do is for McGregor to just jump back in the pool now. There's still time for him to return in 2023, maybe December Vegas card. So there's still time. So I don't, maybe we should start panicking a little bit when that 6-month window is closing for him to compete in 2023, because I don't think he's going to want to push his return to 2024 if he's ready to go. The show is going to air, The Ultimate Fighter, and what are we just going to sit there and there's going to be no fight? So I think for the time being, it's March. There's still time for him to get in back to the pool if he's going to fight in 2023 within the next month or so. So I think maybe we can start wondering if he doesn't get back into his testing pool within the next month, what is going to happen here? Is he going to get an exemption? And maybe eyebrows will be raised in terms of what will happen with him once that time period passes. For now, there's still enough time for Conor to return in 2023, and I think that's what should happen.
Mm-hmm. As I look at the calendar, today's March 20th. 6 months would be September 20th. That would leave the 2 Saturdays in September of the 23rd and the 30th. If the UFC is doing a pay-per-view then. We know in October they've already committed, I believe it's the 21st, to going back to Abu Dhabi. You know, it's usually only 1 pay-per-view per month, although we did have 2 today. And then in early November, which I already, again, looked, the 4th and the 11th, those first couple Saturdays, they sometimes go to New York. I'm thinking targeting then is probably where they would bring back Conor McGregor. All right, Mike Bond, what do you think of all this? Do you see the exemption right around the corner, or do you think we're going to play by the rules here 6 months?
I don't know what's going to happen, honestly. I think what goes so far as said, they've kind of laid it out perfectly on both sides. I mean, in theory, for the integrity of the sport, for the USADA program, like, yeah, he should go back and do the 6 months. But I don't know. I got this feeling in my stomach that he's probably going to get this exemption, and it's just going to kind of come through one day, and maybe they'll announce the fight for this date, and then we're just all going to have to deal with it. There'll be the questions asked, but I don't know. That's kind of what my gut is telling me. That's not based on any inside information or reporting, so no one like aggregate this as a reporting fact or anything. I just think that's you know, kind of what it's leaning towards and what Conor's kind of hinting at. You read it there in the statement, George, right? Like, of course, USADA is going to protect itself and saying, like, this is what we recommend, this is what we feel should happen. But at the end of the day, the UFC has the right and the ability to exercise this and make it happen. So what are they going to do? We've seen Conor McGregor get preferential treatment for the better part of a decade at this point in the UFC. So to think that they're suddenly just going to make him do the hard and fast rules, I don't know. I have a little bit of trouble believing that, but perhaps we'll all be surprised and that'll be the case. But yeah, I mean, I want to see this fight happen as soon as we can get it. I know Michael Chandler wants it to happen as soon as possible. Michael Chandler doesn't seem to really care whether Conor McGregor is clean or dirty or whatever the case may be. He's said it multiple times. It's like, I fought in Bellator for years, and I know for a fact some of the guys I fought were not clean in there. So not saying Conor McGregor's doing one thing, you know, one way or the other, but if it's not Michael Chandler's concern or whatever, you know, maybe that makes the UFC's decision a little bit easier if there is some concerns about what he's been doing in this off time. So I guess we'll just kind of have to wait and see what happens at this point. But this is not one of those things that we're being very well looped in on, right? Like, I don't think if he does go back in the pool, he's going to make some big announcement or something. It's just going to be up to like the media and things like that to be checking the USADA database. I'm sure one day if he is back in there, his name will just pop up and we'll be off to the races, I guess.
The more I think about it, guys, I think he probably, if you don't see him on the New York card in November or the Vegas card in December, that's kind of it. Dana also threw out AT&T Stadium, which is where the Dallas Cowboys play. So he brought stadiums back into the fold, and I would love to see that. I've always said the Allegiant Stadium as well. I thought that was going to be one of the big targets.
George, are you saying if you don't see him in November or December, you don't think he fights at all and he doesn't come back?
I think now we're looking at 2024, early 2024, because I know he really loves that whole Forbes thing. And so if he can fight in January, and this is the year where he fights 2 or 3 times, he really loved being on that Forbes list. So I could almost see him saying, hey, let's just wait till the beginning of the year. Plus, it would make sense because Dallas Cowboys and the Las Vegas Raiders, they don't play in January. They usually don't make the playoffs. So the stadium is clear and open for that fight to be made.
You don't think the apple flavored Proper 12 is going to get him on that list alone? It's just going to be selling all the bottles.
Well, no, because the sale helped a lot when he was on there last year, I believe. But the sales already happened, so yeah, now it has to do with sales. I'm not so sure about that one, but what do I know? All right, guys, we have time for some additionals. Let's get to it, and let's get back to Kamaru Usman. So, look, again, like I told Fada and you all 6 months ago, we were talking about, hey, is this guy the greatest welterweight ever? And he runs into Leon Edwards, loses a couple fights. Did he do enough to become the greatest welterweight ever and hold on to it? What do you think now, Fada?
I mean, for me, George St. Pierre was always that. I hadn't changed my mind, even though Usman was on a really good reign. But I don't think we should write his story just yet. Kamaru Usman, we'll see how he rebounds. Obviously, this is a tough spot for him, losing twice to the same guy. He has kind of cleared out the rest of the division when you look at matchups. I mean, I almost forgot to matchmake Kamaru Usman when we were talking about the welterweight division. He's now in that picture, not in the title picture right now, but I guess, you could end up matching him with a Bilal Muhammad or something like that. I think he gets a top contender next, and we'll see if he holds his ground, and the title could change hands. Let's see how long Leon holds on to it. So I think there's a lot of question marks still in terms of Kamaru Usman's career. I'm not ready to write him off yet, but regardless, for me, George St. Pierre is number one. He was number one, still number one for me, even when Kamaru Usman was going through his reign. Kamaru was on his way to potentially make a really, really good case. But, unfortunately for him, Leon put a stop to that. But, for me, GSP is number one.
Mm-hmm. Mike, dare I even ask?
No, I mean, you guys know that it's not even Canadian bias. I think it's just facts, right? Like Far said there, he was on his way, a couple more wins, and this would have been a real conversation. I know Dana White had to put his promoter hat on. He was saying he's already that guy, but I think like Usman was getting close, but this is just a serious blow. I mean, if he can somehow take a couple guys out, get another title shot, win the belt back, maybe he fights Leon a fourth time, like some crazy thing, maybe he gets that back. You can redeem yourself from loss and keep building your legacy. But he is, I think, a little too old to maybe make a run like this at this point, is being through a little bit too much in the sport in terms of, damage to his body, even pre-existing from before he started fighting MMA from his wrestling days. So, I think Usman has very clearly solidified himself as the second best welterweight of all time. I think he's ahead of Matt Hughes, ahead of Tyron Woodley. I think his work was superior to theirs. But George St. Pierre, as we all know, was a very special career. So to me, he's still number one pretty clearly.
Mm-hmm. How about you guys?
Yeah, this one hurt a lot for Usman. I mean, the thing that makes GSP stand out is, yes, he has losses, but he's come back and avenged those. And he's avenged them in a way where we didn't really have any doubt, right? So even if for some reason Kamaru Usman were to get another shot at Leon Edwards, it would only tie them, right? He'd have to probably do it again unless he just absolutely destroyed him. But it just seems like such a long road to get to that. And like Mike said, at his age, I think it might be a little bit more difficult. So I think GSP's kind of sitting at the top of that throne right now pretty comfortably.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of GOATs, right? Anderson Silva will be inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame this year. The Pioneer Wing has another edition. It is the Spider. I'm happy to see this. I'm happy to hear it and watch it on Saturday. I don't know, man. This kind of should have been done a while back already. It's just late to the party, but Mike's shaking his head. And you go first. Go ahead, Mike. No?
No, I mean, like, in theory, that'd be great, but that's the thing that I don't like about the UFC Hall of Fame is they rush these guys in so quickly, right? Like Khabib, Daniel Cormier had like just being retired. They throw them in there. They've done this time after time with Bisping, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I like about, you look at like football and basketball, there's like, oh, you have to be retired for 5 years or something, then you get to go in. I mean, of course, like if we had a rule like that, Anderson Silva should be, the first eligible in there, but like this guy's still fighting, in theory, right? Like, I don't know if he's planning to do boxing or more MMA or whatever, but like we're going to have Jose Aldo, like the night they announced him to be in this Hall of Fame class, they're like, also watch his boxing fight in 2 weeks on UFC Fight Pass. It's like, okay, well, this is kind of weird. So I would like people to actually be done, and then we can properly appreciate their careers and have that moment. But I know the UFC is short on stars. They need, people that can, sell tickets to these Hall of Fame and draw the interest, and et cetera, et cetera. So I get why they rush some of them in there. But yeah, given the fact that they do play it fast and loose, maybe Anderson should have already been in. But yeah, I don't mind the timing of this at all, honestly.
And I love Jose Aldo. He totally belongs. But when I saw him go in a few months ago, and he had just fought in August against Merab Dvalishvili, I thought, wait a minute. I had to actually go look up the UFC Hall of Fame and say, he goes in before Anderson? Like, Anderson's been gone from the UFC before? And yeah, so even though he's doing some other combat sports, so is Jose. I mean, that thing is kind of what scrambled my brain a little bit. How about you guys? I mean, none of us are questioning whether he should be in or not, right? Like, do you have a favorite moment maybe you want to share? Let me throw that one at you.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about where this man was in Pride, like, he was on the verge of giving up, right? And I think it was Nogueira that talked him into sticking around. So a favorite moment from Anderson Silva would probably be when he landed that knee on Chael Sonnen, like, just how gangster it was and how dangerous of a strike. It could have hit him in the head.
Yeah.
And that would have ended everything, right? But he was just so pinpoint with his striking. I don't think we'll ever see another fighter like him. And I think that's what separates him from everyone else, is just some of the things that he was able to do were absolutely magical.
Oh, yeah, when I saw that, I remember thinking, wait a minute, downed opponent. And then when they showed the replay, that's how accurate he was. I mean, he lunged into it as well. Fada, how about you? Your reaction to Anderson Silva in the UFC Hall of Fame? And if you have a favorite moment you want to share, go right ahead.
I mean, are these fighters ever really done? I mean, we got Ortiz and Liddell down the line, a fight that I don't know if anybody really wanted to see. So I think in that regard, it's a little bit hard to decide when they're actually done. But yeah, I understand Mike's point. But yeah, I mean, Anderson, no brainer. Obviously, he's one of the reasons I even wanted to cover this sport. I mean, his run, his winning streak, his title defenses, the way he put guys out in spectacular fashion. I think for me, that front kick of Vitor Belfort was probably my favorite moment of his. Even the comeback against Chael Sonnen was insane as well. I think that was I had watched MMA long before that, but that was the first time I watched everything in terms of a lead up to a fight. As a fan, I still wasn't covering the sport at that point, but I had, and obviously Chael was a big reason to do with that. But just seeing the dramatic comeback in that fight is also another memorable moment. But, the front kick knockout of Vitor as well sticks. I mean, he's had so many incredible finishes, but his title defenses, his winning streak, just that stretch is one of the most incredible ones that I've seen in the sport.
Mike, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Mike, but does Anderson still hold the record for most wins in the UFC in a row? I think that's something Usman was threatening or may have tied. Do you happen to know that? And did you have a favorite moment too?
Yeah, he's got the record, 16 consecutive wins. Obviously, John Jones has a longer, undefeated streak because of the no contest and things like that. But in terms of consecutive wins, and especially consecutive wins to start a UFC career, that 16 fight run by him still stands alone. Kamaru Usman was about a minute away from tying that, and Leon Edwards kind of derailed the whole thing. It seems like there seems to be this weird karma around this whole thing. Anytime anyone gets to 13 or 14, they seem to lose, and Usman seemed like he was going to be the guy. But in terms of favorite moments, I don't think there's really anyone I can add on top of that. The first UFC event I attended as a fan in person, I was 16, was Anderson Silva against Travis Lutter. Travis Lutter missed weight for a title fight, and that's one that kind of screwed Anderson Silva's record a little bit too, because he didn't get credited with the title defense. So
True.
Demetrius Johnson and him in theory should be tied, but Travis Lutter missing weight ended that for him. So yeah, that's a weird one that kind of stands out to me too, just because it was first event.
And Hughes got screwed by Joe Riggs. Joe Riggs filled in for Caro Parisian, and that's a title fight he could have had. And then against Royce Gracie, they went in at 175, so Hughes could be at 9 title defenses instead of 7, and he might still be going, I'm number 2 to GSP, not Kamaru Usman. But anyway, we can't rewrite history. My favorite moment, I know we're about to wrap up here. Well, no, I mean, I think Goes may have stole it, or so maybe Mafada, the up kick, the front kick was amazing, right? We all jumped out of our seats, but it's just some vivid ones, man. Here, rearranging Rich Franklin's nose, taking that title from him, and then that debut versus Chris Lieben, and then all of a sudden he's doing that little samba dance. So slick. That guy was amazing. We are out of here. Join us every Monday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, here on Spinning Back Clique with our fantastic colleagues that we have here, Goz and I. And we'll see you soon. Go out and be a champion.